Welcome, everybody. I'm Ellen J. Cart with Monroe County Identify and Reduce Invasive Species, better known as MC Iris. And we are delighted to have Emily Fender Sizemore speaking this evening. And Emily, in her day job, is a PhD student in neuroscience, quickly finishing her qualifying exams. But how I know Emily is that she has been an MC Iris volunteer for quite some time. Now, MC Iris, as our name implies, we look for invasive species, we control invasive species, we do weed wrangles to control invasive species, but we also every year do a native plant sale. And we do that because we realize that once we've had you kill the invasives, you need to put something in there. And so our sale this year is September 12th, and I hope you can all be there. We'll have more information about that. But we're delighted to have Emily speaking this evening on tools that you can use to design your native plant garden. Emily.
Thank you for the introduction. I am going to share my screen now, make sure that everybody can hear me okay and see everything. So here I have this pulled up, and then I can present. Look okay?
Looks great.
And it's on full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as Ellen stated, I am going to be talking about today exploring some free tools for designing a home native garden. And she mentioned this a little bit already, but I'm going to, I will start my talk talking a little bit about MC Iris and what it does in our community. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and why this is something that matters to me and something that I have pursued. Talk a little bit about choosing plants and how to find what is native and what works in which situation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more, the meat of the talk, the design tools that I personally used in order to design my own home native plantings. And then we have some time for questions, discussions, and if people have anything that they have used in the past that worked really well for them, definitely want to learn from you all as well. So MC Iris is an organization that seeks to improve Monroe County by educating people on invasive and native plants. We do this through weed wrangles, invasive plant surveys, grants for Monroe County homeowners, especially to help people purchase native plants at our yearly native plant sale. And we have our native plant sale, as mentioned, in September. So at the bottom here, I just kind of chose some photos about showing kind of just our process of how we get there. We start these from seed. So when our plants start from seed, and the community can help grow these in milk jugs, and it's over the winter. And there's a cat who needs attention, so apologies. Then, once they've grown in the spring, we pot them up into their individual pots, and then we sell them. This helps increase native plant exposure in our community, and let me see if I can find. I can see that. Cool. Where we can sell these and provide good sources for native plants to our community. Just a little bit about myself. I have been a volunteer and grower for the native plant sale with MC Iris since 2023. I am a Indiana University PhD student, however, not the plant kind of scientist. I study neurobiology, but I like to think of more the science of plants, and especially native plants, is kind of the science I do for fun. I am passionate about both scientific communication and sharing about how important and fun and beautiful native plants are. And just as kind of a background of how I discovered these tools. In 2024, I moved into a new home, and I being a student, had a bit more delusion and time than I did money in order to plant my own gardens. So I um, tried to look for resources that would help me design my garden with the input of some expert seminars and input from locals as well. So what you can see here in this photo, this is a design I made when I was planning my native planting in what I call the meadow in my backyard. This breaks down different plants that I have, and then over here is an example of what some of this was actually looking like this spring, and it got much taller as well. So I'm very happy with how things have developed. So this work of going from growing some of these plants from seed to what kind of plants can I plant and how do I arrange them, then to practice is why I wanted to share some of this. So I'm going to hide these floating moving controls so that you see the rest of my slide. Before planting, just going through the process. And if you have not seen the previous talk by Phil Oster on how to plant natives after invasive removal, that is amazing, and that is also on YouTube as well. So, but I will just go over this briefly. So, identifying and preparing your site, just like any landscaping, how much sun and moisture do you have? Do you need to remove those invasive plants before you plant your natives? And what plants do you already have that exist in that location? I've been pleasantly surprised to find some natives that I did not plant in my own garden. So identifying some of those, if you're not sure what it is, identifying it, and it could be something that is a friend. Then choosing kind of base plants. So you do not need to know your entire plant list at first, but maybe some of the bigger ones, the larger ones, and where you want those to start laying out your design. And we need to consider how large it is at a mature size. Does it self-seed or spread by rhizomes, which is a good thing in some cases because that means it will fill in your space more quickly and look very full. When does it flower? And then how does it benefit the ecosystem? So we're thinking, is it a keystone species? Does it host caterpillars? Does it feed birds? Things where we make sure that our landscape is benefiting the overall ecosystem. And then finally, layout. So how closely are you planting things together? How many of each plant per grouping? And how large and what shape is that space? So when we're thinking about how close it's planting, there are different choices. So some plantings may have them more closely spaced, in which it can tend to look a little bit more have a different aesthetic look than well separated or defined spaces between plants. And then how many of each plant are you putting in that group? Do you want to do less if it's something that potentially spreads a little bit quicker? And then how large is that space and how many plants do you need to fully fill that in? I also wanted to share a little bit about some of the search tools I've used for native plants because these are very, very helpful and have helped me think through which plants I need and where. So some examples here are through the Indiana Native Plant Society. As you can see up here, you can see that it goes through different categories: ferns, grasses, shrubs, trees, vines, and wildflowers. Light, you can search by height, bloom color, the season, and which pollinators it benefits. The Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center also has a very detailed database in which you can select the state we're native to, the habitat, so the general appearance of the plant, is it a perennial, annual, and the lifespan, as well as the light requirement and soil requirement. You can also look at when it is blooming, by when it's blooming, and the color. Finally, we also can look at the National Wildlife Federation, and it tells you which plants are native to you by zip code, so not just by state or region. And that can be very helpful because just because something is native to this northern Indiana may not mean it's native to southern Indiana in some cases. And I am going to be providing links for all of these that can be shared with this video as well, so you can find all of this later. So just going over a little bit of what I really like about the Indiana Native Plant Society search tool. It has a very good regional focus. It labels pollinator benefits very clearly, and the symbol codes are very easy to process. So you can see that pollinators, for example, this is for rattlesnake master. You can see that the symbols down there are for all the types of pollinators it benefits, as well as labeling it for different uses within a landscape. It also will tell you how much light it needs, what kind of moisture it can tolerate, the bloom color, the height, and a very general bloom season. And also, is it a host for? What is it potentially a host for? The Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center has very detailed range in flowers, which I like, and it also tells you the bloom color, the bloom timing, and some scientific classification of it, which I find very interesting. So when you see here, you can look at the conditions, and it will also note, say, if it does self-seed and what kind of flower shape it has. Finally, this is not like I don't use this as a search tool, but another source I find very helpful is Prairie Moon Nursery. So Prairie Moon Nursery is a commercial business, but when you go onto their website and search a plant, they give you information on, especially which you don't sometimes get elsewhere, germination codes. So if you are growing these from seed, native plants need very special treatment of usually winter stratification, which is why we put them in milk jugs over the winter. And this website very nicely details what that particular seed needs if you're going to be growing it from seed. It also has some sun exposure, as well as soil type, height, bloom time, and the root type, which is very interesting to know and good to know depending on your soil type. But the big thing that I look at when I go to Prairie Moon is their range maps. Their range map is very detailed. As you can see, it is county by county. It is not state by state. So you can get details on where is it native. So in this case, so our dark green is it's native in the state. The light green is it's native in the county, but it is common. And then yellow is it's native in that county, but it is rare. So that can tell you where the plants you are interested in are native to and give you a better resolution than it is native to Indiana or it is native to the Midwest. And I use the same species for all of these just for some comparison purposes. So now I'm going to talk a little bit through some of these design tools that I used and found were helpful. There are a couple options on here depending on your level of comfort with technology, and your needs. So the most customizable one and the one that I used most extensively was through the Blazing Star Design a Pollinator Garden tool. The most advanced features one I found, which actually has come out since I did this, but I did play around with it a bit, is the Native Plant Planner. A site with some pre-designed layouts to help you get inspiration is Prairie Moon Nursery. And as well as talking about all of these, which rely on technology and computer access, also using a graph paper layout is an amazing way to do it as well. So going into our first tool, design a pollinator garden tool through Blazing Star Gardens. This is a free tool for home use, but through a commercial nursery. It is the way they make it open source and free is this is through Google Sheets and Google presentations, and to make it accessible for everyone. It does work to some degree in PowerPoint, but it works best in the Google platform. It does have shape and species that are customizable, but it also provides a lot of common US native plants already. So this is an example, which I did show you earlier. So it allowed me to build out the structure, the shape of this, paths going through, and then lay out each of these plants. So you can see here, so there's a lance leaf coreopsis, this is lyre leaf sage, New England aster, switchgrass, Joe Pyeweed, Liatris, false indigo. So there's a lot of these that are already built in there, and I did not have to customize most of these. Another reason I like them is I feel like this perspective has allowed me to see things as they overlap better than sometimes the top-down perspective you get with other approaches. And so just as an example of the customizability of this platform, say you don't have stiff goldenrod in this. You can use the shape of the plant and the shape of the flower and color of the flower to make that plant in this software. Then you can adjust it to its height. So this is the most customizable option I have found for this purpose. And what's nice is this is dedicated exclusively to native plants. So keeps this very relevant. So I am going to show a little bit of some of the cool features that are through this tool. So this is made through a Google presentation. So when you go into the website, you can make a copy of it, and then all these designs are modifiable by you. There's a YouTube tutorial of how to use that too, and will link that as well. So just on one of their examples, they make recommendations like putting taller plants toward the middle or the back of the garden and showing how to mix grasses and sedges throughout those flowers as well. The most useful thing I have found with this is it has lots and lots of native plants already made into templates, and they divide them in several different ways. They divide them into sun and shade, and then also provide it where it's like a drier to wetter gradient. They do the same thing with talking about plants that spread quite a bit. And plants that can handle clay soil, which is very, very helpful where we are. Plants that can handle sandy soil. And plants that go together. Finally, they also have these very helpful bloom charts where they show a combination they might recommend and then have the distribution of when across the season they are blooming. They also have some dedicated materials for sedges and grasses, which are great native plants that are sometimes not as appreciated as the wildflowers, as well as some recommendations for how to actually plant the garden afterwards. So while this does require a bit of comfort with basic graphic design or using a presentation to drag around pictures and make sure it's at the correct scale, I find this was very helpful and helping me visualize what exactly it would look like. The one thing that this does not have is when I put this together, unless you were to manually month to month, as in this is what's blooming in May, this is what's blooming in June, this is what's blooming in July, it does not necessarily have that. So when we look back at this is not actually representative of what you would see. because Liatris is not necessarily blooming at the same time my spiderwort is. However, it is helpful with the height of the plants and how they may interact in their texture. Next, looking at some of the tools that Prairie Moon offers. So these are based off commercial kits, which they do sell, but you do not need to buy them to look at these layouts. So this is an example of what they call their pollinator patch garden. And they basically show an example layout of how they may lay this out using butterfly weed, multiple kinds of coneflower and coreopsis, as well as little blue stem for a grass. This gives you good ideas for combinations in shade, sun. They have a garden-friendly one and in pollinator options. They also have a mega pollinator garden 50 plant combination as well, while the rest of them are 18 plants. The last online tool I'm going to be talking about is the Native Plant Planner, and the picture I have here is their template for the Minnesota Woodland Garden. This does have a free level and paid level, and I did find when I was playing around with it, I wished it would have done more at the free level. However, this did have a lot of options and is still a useful tool even if you do not have the paid version. It includes a diagram of what's blooming across months, not just at one point in time. Another really cool feature of this is the different views it allows you. So this is the diagram. This has, the plants are less defined, but it labels all the species and shows their range. And then the last one tries to use the more realistic image of some of these species. However, this is from top down, so I find it a little bit more difficult to visualize how things will interact with each other in terms of height. I also have ready to show what this may look like. So in this example here, I have laid out a space and there are different species. You can drag them around and go from there. So when you are ready to add a plant, which is one of the things I find very useful about this tool, I can search for a species with either a common or a scientific name. So in this case, this is the Joe Pye weed I mean, and I can then stamp, and it goes, and it is at its mature size already and does the scaling for you. It also does have nativars, but does label what is a true native plant. So this is a very adaptable tool. So for example, baby Joe dwarf pieweed would be an example of, say, like a nativar of the species. So it does have options for both true species and nativars, so cultivars of a native species. You can see there's a create a new plant tool, however, that is behind the paywall. And here is where I can also change view. So I can go from design to shape, where it can show me a different view than with the photo. The other big feature that I really like about this is it shows you what it's going to look like at different times in the season. Let's pull this over here. So in April, this columbine is going to be blooming, or it's more likely to be blooming. And then you get more blooms coming in May, then June, July, and then you see the columbine is now done blooming. So this is a really helpful way to visualize what's going to be blooming and when. So even if this tool does have some limitations on the free end, this is a really important part of it. So I was just playing around with putting some species on there just to see how this would work so I could share it. And there is a detailed YouTube seminar through the Sagamore Native Plant Society where the creator of this tool talks all about how to use it. Okay. There is also, of course, the option just to use paper and graph paper. So I did the same thing on graph paper as I was thinking through it. So this may be something that people are familiar with, but if you're not, you out diagram your area, you say how many feet in each direction that is, and then you determine your spacing. So in this, I did about every 12-inch spacing for plants. And then the circle is the mature space that that plant is likely to occupy. So this is a way to do it with even if you have potential difficulty with or are unable to use some of the more online tools. Another way I made this helpful is I took colored pencils and colored in the color of the flower too. So there's ways to do this in which you can visualize um, without without a computer. This is another way to look at multi-season interest. So when we say multi-season interest, we basically mean that there are things flowering at all points across the season. So I had it by species, scientific name, and then the number I was using. And then I was able to outline, this was just in a spreadsheet where I just used the color to show at what point is this blooming. And this is where I could ask myself, do I have enough things blooming in the spring? Do I have enough things blooming in the fall? Because early flowers are important to pollinators that are waking up, and late are important for migrating pollinators, as well as very beautiful, and including our goldenrods and our asters. So this is just January, February through the months. And you can see there are things that bloom through October or November, depending on when we have frost. So this is where in a second, I will open discussion, but just a pitch. There are a bunch of MC Iris volunteering opportunities. This first QR code is for the native plant sale details and species list, so you can look in advance and make your list before you go in, and then still buy things you didn't plan on. And tell me if these don't work. I think they did. I tested them. As well as a link to volunteer at our native plant sale. So we do still need cashiers for the second shift. So if this is something you feel like you are willing to do, or any other sort of job at the native plant sale, this is something that we would appreciate. This would include on September 12th during the actual sale from 9 to 1 p.m., right? And as well as on Friday for help with setting up. Okay. And I will also say that volunteering by going to our winter sowing events gives you access to people who are very knowledgeable in our local community, have a lot of very relevant experience, which is where I learned a lot about native plants, and very generous people who are willing to share seeds or willing to give you their opinion. This is also a way, if there's extra things and extra plants you don't need, this is a way to more inexpensively plant larger areas, which is primarily how I ended up planting most of my gardens. So you get to benefit the community, meet some great people, and also potentially get some plants out of it. So now I'll open this up to questions, discussion, or any tools that you may have found helpful in when you have designed your own gardens. And I will exit full screen so I can take a look at the chat. Um, we will, in the YouTube link, I will be sharing links to all these resources, including videos on how to use them as well for further details.
Emily, that was awesome. I had vaguely heard of some of those tools. I know the INPS plant finder, but the design tools I really didn't realize how specific they are now.
Oh
And
yeah,
this is way better than my old graph paper. And I mean,
yes,
that's a fine way to go, but that some of those tools really
yes,
allow you to just put that plant right in there.
it did. And where this is very nice is where I find this very nice is these are tools that are designed for native plants, not just include native plant options, which mean that they're actually helpful. So looking at the chat, so are there filters available for deer resistance on any of these tools? Yes, I believe there is at least deer resistance. I know in Prairie Moon that is one of the filters. Ellen, is there one in INPS?
Um, there is not. I wish there
Okay,
was.
okay. But I know when I have a question on that, the Prairie Moon has a filter especially for that. So if you go into through INPS or one of the other tools, but then still have some other questions, that's sometimes where I find like Prairie Moon is very helpful. And then another question is, any chance I can design in Blazing Star, export it, and import into the native plant app to use the blooming by month feature? I have not found a way to do that. I don't know if those systems are compatible, unfortunately. Is there any other questions? You can put it in the chat or speak out, whatever works best for you. Anything you want to see more in either of those tools, since we do have them pulled up, is also an option. My favorite native at the moment, it depends by week, honestly, but lots of favorites. My rosin weed is doing really, really well, and I see so many bees on it. And the other plant, more for the shade, is I have some late figwort that's blooming right now, and you can see lots and lots of native bees on that, and that has been a magnet.
Oh, I have a quick question.
Of course.
Um, was there anything in the tool that accounts for elevation? Like I've got a pretty steep slope in my front yard and my backyard. Um, that I struggle with trying to figure out what to plant on either of those slopes.
I don't believe any of these tools have explicit like elevation markers. However, I do know that if you were to take a look at like what kind of roots the plant has, so things that have fibrous roots especially, and ones that are a bit more spreading through those fibrous roots are typically plants that would do very well in stabilizing some more sloped areas. Ellen, if you have other feedback on that.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And I tend to, if it's a slope area, it's really key to get things established as quickly as possible. So one thing you can look at are the clonal species that do send out lots of rhizomes, like American germander and things like that. Wild ginger, if it's
Native
shady.
grasses and sedges.
Yep. Yeah, all of those are good.
Yeah, so anything that's listed for erosion control would
Okay,
be, yeah,
that is good to know because it's very intimidating thinking
it is.
about how long if I like kill the grass is how long am I going to have naked dirt that's just getting spread all over the place by rain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important, especially if you've got bare soil on a slope. Yeah, you are going to deal with some erosion, and being able to time it such that you are putting seed down of like some native grasses to hold that so that they can sprout quickly and hold the soil, and then you can plug plant into that. If it's shady, there's all kinds of there's silky rye, wild rye, bottle brush grass that do really well and will come up quickly and hold that soil. If it's in sun, there are a whole suite of other species of grass that you can throw seeds out and get the soil held. And then you can add in the more ornamental species.
Ellen, do you think fall or spring is potentially better, or is both a good option?
Fall, if you can do it early enough, so like a September to very early October is good because you want the seeds to sprout and survive over the winter. And it's otherwise spring before the hard rains come. So an early spring, like late March, early April. And if it's very steep, you just have to go and get yourself an erosion blanket and put that on it to really hold it. You put down the seed and you put an erosion blanket that then decomposes over time, biodegrades, and make sure that you don't get much erosion.
And
I
then,
don't think I'd heard of that one, the erosion blanket.
Mm.
and then thinking a little bit about the different soil at the top versus bottom potentially would be a good idea. So, if water's running down, would you get more moisture at the bottom versus the top of the potentially sloped area? If that makes sense. Okay, and then there is Drew asked, do you find one resource more helpful than others for also planting native ground covers between your larger plants? I do think I like the Blazing Star tool better for that because I like how the plants overlap a little bit better on that and how they're distinguished. Because you do get some overlap, but that is reflective of what you would actually be seeing. So I think the functionality for like ground cover beneath that would be my preference. However, I also do know, I'm not sure if it's in the free version, but in the Native Plant Planner, there is an option to upload a background photo. So say it was like an area that was covered by one type of ground cover, you could potentially do it that way.
Any other questions for Emily? Well, then I think I will thank Emily for a great talk and thank all of you for attending, and hope that we see you at our September 12th native plant sale at Switchyard Park Maintenance Building from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I hope everyone has wonderful success with their native gardens this year.